It's not stable. Huh?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So when you finish, just turn it off. So
Dear ladies, dear gentlemen, your excellencies, it's a great honor to kick off the next session of Press Forum Dialogue on Western Balkan navigating in turbulent times. Indeed, these are turbulent times, so the one that we are living. And the new geopolitical dynamics will impact the region and their integration into the EU. The countries of the European Union are called to greater responsibility as the region is called to show how they can provide added value through their integration into the European Union. At the same time, all Western allies are called to have a greater responsibility, a greater vision for their future. So without further ado, I will give the floor for a keynote address to Deputy Prime Minister for Foreign Affairs, Bojan Maricic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matteo. Thank you of the organizers for inviting me. I think we couldn't have more timely discussion for Western Balkans navigating in turbulent times. I'll try to be as brief as possible and as clear as possible in my messages, and I'll try to open some questions that I consider important in this point. I think that we need, in order to sketch the situation, we need to make some positions clear and to say some truths loudly, so we can be aware of what is our starting point for analysis and for taking decisions further on. First of all, today, we can clearly say that the European Union is still a peace project and still a political project. If that wouldn't be the case, we wouldn't discuss at all about the Ukrainian perspective for joining the European Union and the perspective of all the other countries from the Eastern Partnership. So it is important to bear in mind that EU still is much more political and peace project than only economic project and project of common market. Second point is that NATO is still extremely important for the Western Balkan region, for Europe as well, but particularly for the stability and future prosperity of our countries. Today is the 4th year since we have the Prespa agreement. This is the agreement that brought us into NATO. At that point, when we were taking difficult decisions and changing our constitution, changing our constitutional name of the country for the sake of joining NATO and opening the prospects for the EU membership, we were asked by some skepticals, why is it so important today to join NATO? There are no wars anymore. NATO is just a military organization. Why do we need it? I would give their answer today. Do we need NATO, or is it better that we are in or out? And if today Finland and Sweden, countries, prosperous countries, democratic countries, successful countries, if they are asking for membership in NATO and North Macedonia is already there, this means that it was important and it was worth it. And this means that we need more NATO presence in the region, in the turbulent times. The next point is that Western Balkans is still a turbulent region. So there is no permanent peace, permanent stability. Maybe it is like that now. Maybe it seems to us like that now. Maybe a year ago we couldn't predict what would happen in Ukraine, as we might not predict what can happen on the Western Balkans next year or year after. but we have to keep in mind that Western Balkans is a turbulent region with open issues across it, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo and Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, the issue of our European perspective of North Macedonia and Albania, and our dispute with Bulgaria. All of these things have high potential of keeping this region far away from permanent stability in the future. My next point is that EU enlargement is in crisis, and that is very visible. The last member of the EU is Croatia, which joined in 2013. Usually, there are 9 years between two enlargements. This year is 9th year since the last enlargement, and we don't have any idea when will be the next enlargement, which means that the EU enlargement policy is in crisis. And the EU enlargement policy, on the other hand, used to be, and I think still is, the most successful stability policy of the European Union towards Southeastern Europe, towards Eastern Europe, and towards Western Balkans. And final point in sketching the situation is that regional cooperation is curing our frustration from the EU accession. This is why we keep it so strong, and we are so strongly on the side of the regional cooperation. Whether you call it Berlin process or we call it Open Balkans, we are strongly tied to that because we think it's better to have strong regional cooperation than strong regional crises and disputes. Better to create an atmosphere in which we will make the borders less important and open the doors for opportunities of the young people and of the business operators, rather than embracing historic issues, opening new disputes or reviving the old ones. I would just make 3 recommendations what is necessary for us to do and for the European Union and NATO to do in the upcoming period. I think that the European Union needs a clear plan for the Western Balkans that we couldn't see at the moment. And that plan must be plan for accession. We think that we need to stick to the promise from Thessaloniki 19 years ago. We discussed this last Friday at the summit in Thessaloniki, and that promise should be still alive, and to keep it alive today much more than in the past, because we really need the full accession of all the Western Balkan countries if we want full stability and permanent stability of the Western Balkan countries. We have heard all the ideas about staged accession, phased accession, or something that will make the process of accession much more dynamic and much more beneficial for the candidates, and we can accept that we need that. We need it as soon as possible. We need a dynamic accession process that will open the doors for socializing of our institutions, politicians and citizens much more before we become actual members of the European Union. And this is why we need an accession plan with a time frame when these countries can become, even in those stages, members of the European Union, even with some reservations and derogations that have not been introduced so far, like the veto power, like the numbers of commissioners, etc. In that regard, European political community is also an important idea that will bring us strategic discussions on the table of all the democratic European countries. We think that is important, but that cannot and must not be a substitute for our full membership, particularly of the countries of the Western Balkans that are fully surrounded by member states of the European Union. And finally, whatever happens next week in the June summit and in the further days with the next presidencies, I think that it is important that Western Balkan countries and Western Balkans as a region is not being forgotten by the European Union and by NATO, so we don't feel to be left alone, because we know that third countries and third parties would definitely come inside much deeper than they are now if there is such a situation. We know that the Russian policy on the Western Balkans is not very full of content, but it's clear that they want to prove to the people of the region that EU is a failure for Western Balkans, that EU doesn't work for us. We think that we can beat that perception only with strong policies of full presence of NATO and full presence of EU and clear plan for accession of the Western Balkan countries in the European Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I would ask, I would skip, for time constraint, I would skip the agenda. I would ask Sir Stuart Peach if he could give immediately his address, and maybe he can speak us about the role of UK in this project.
And thank you. And thank you for this invitation to this important forum and this important dialogue. And if I may pick up, Deputy Prime Minister and Excellencies, on the last point, I think it's really important that all of us, whether we are in the European Union or not, friends of the region, we are, working with the United States and other allies, we need to be really clear on the importance of the Euro-Atlantic journey and the narrative of that journey. Because since that began, as the Deputy Prime Minister has said, there are other voices, there are other alternatives. And Russian influence is not new. Russian influence to turn back the tide of progress is not new. The tools may be new. The noise created by the tragedy of the illegal war in Ukraine, we talked about last night in this forum, and the tragedy for the people of Ukraine, we celebrated last night with the award, but it doesn't stop. And so we need to be really clear-eyed now about the importance of this Euro-Atlantic journey that the region is on. And the United Kingdom government, we support this. NATO accession, I was the chair of the military committee at the time. I'm still very proud of that small role I played. And we should also remember what the Deputy Prime Minister has said. Collective security is provided to 30 countries and 1 billion people through NATO. And I think now more than ever, we should remark on the foresight of the people who created the alliance in 1949, the 12 original allies, and the wisdom of their drafting of the Washington Treaty, a treaty that's never needed revision. And so it's important that we remember that bedrock of European security, collective security, and in the Euro-Atlantic journey, there is space for the United Kingdom to support you here in North Macedonia and all the countries of this region. And that's what we do. We offer support. We offer support to the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, facilitated by the EU. We offer support to the really difficult situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And if I want to leave you with a message, and for me, with 50 years military experience, it's a clear message, we must not allow political disputes and political problems to become security issues. Particularly now we've seen the mask fall from the Russian face, and therefore now more than ever, we must not allow this region to develop security problems out of political crises and issues. And so we will support the Euro-Atlantic journey. There's new money in the UK government in projects, programs, UK export finance, energy security. And as the military person, I would say we need to be really clear, and I'm speaking as much to academics and think tanks here, that security now needs to be broadly defined. Russia has weaponized energy. We need to respond. We need to modernize secure supply. Russia has weaponized food security. We need to respond. We need to look at our geography and develop our infrastructure. And so the call is simple. The UK is willing to cooperate with our friends in Europe and the European Union, cooperate with all the countries in the region on that Euro-Atlantic journey. And the people of the region need it, now more than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for these very clear messages. I would ask Donika Agarwala-Schwarz, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, to give her address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we spoke already today, this region needs a clear perspective, and it's about the European perspective. But do not forget, this region aims, most of us, a Euro-Atlantic perspective, because this is the future of our continent, and this is the future of our region. So the Republic of Kosovo is trying to come as near to the NATO structure as we can, having the fact that 4 of the NATO members are non-recognizers And that's not always easy, but we will keep fighting to become as near as we can, because Kosovo and NATO are linked to each other in a way that NATO is part of Kosovo's history and NATO is present in Kosovo, but Kosovo at the same time is part of NATO's history, because Kosovo is a positive, successful result of a multilateral intervention that came to end genocide in our country. So now, as we are talking about the future, and not only that we are not sticking to history, but trying to deal with the presence always needs to have a clear vision of where you want to be in the near future and where you want to be long term. So the Western Balkans have shown, most of us, that our orientation is pro-European, pro-NATO and pro-Western orientation. And this orientation should be honored and should be kept and led to the full integration of the Western Balkan in NATO and European Union. That's why I really appreciate very much what you said about that, because security, as you said, is not only about weapons, it's about all the aspects that we are facing every day, and one of them being in Northern Macedonia, and knowing about the threats of fake news in Northern Macedonia. I want to say we are facing the same, and we need to cooperate better in the region with each other to manage that challenge that is bringing from Russian influence at first place through media. But the challenges are diverse, and so if the European Union is interested in having more security, they should finally make the step in including the Western Balkan countries in the Union. So that's first what I would say.
Many thanks. Euro-Atlantic integration, European Union. Of course, the European Union has a key role in all this, and there are big expectations. We are living probably in a unique moment where the strategic responsibility of the Union are evident. I would give the floor to Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia at the European External Action Service, Ms. Angelina Eichhorst. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rie. Good afternoon to everybody. I was trying to think, listening also to the Deputy Prime Ministers, both, how to inject, let's say, thoughts which could sort of help, not so much filling the gaps, because we have a lot of people with a lot of knowledge in this room, but not to repeat what was said before. And I think I want to try and clarify a few things. And if you allow me, Deputy Prime Minister, I want to first start big and then to zoom in, on specific issues. First, what is all being said about the European political community, which is now out there in the narrative, and it's still an idea, it's a thought of creating a space, a bigger space, a table for all equals of allies and partners of the European Union. Our friends, our partners, the countries who are with us in multilateral fora, who are with us on what the European Union is trying to achieve, but this is not about membership of a new entity. And this is very, very, very different, and it's not about enlargement. I want to say it very clear. I understand that many come to me and say, yeah, but is this going to replace the enlargement? Of course not. And that brings me to enlargement. Enlargement is, and thank you for saying it, Deputy Prime Minister Boyan, it was the most, and it is, the most successful foreign policy instrument of the European Union, but again, and I'm the first one to say it, dramatically slow and over the past many years not efficient enough to give strong political signals to the citizens in the region, to ourselves, etc. And we all know the reasons for that. So I'm the first one to be open to all the analysis, but I think we need to try to continuously, and this is also the work of us, civil servants back in Brussels, how to re-energize, rework, and reshape and make sure that we get to the final aim. And in this case, the European perspective, Deputy Prime Minister of Kosovo, the European perspective for all 6 is absolutely clear. It's just very old. It goes back to Thessaloniki. And I agree that you would need to have a time frame. You know, when we drafted the 2018 strategy for the Commission on re-energizing enlargement, we dared to put the date of 2025 in there. Oh my God, that was very daring. I will not mention to you the member states who came to us and to the Commission and to the External Action Service saying, how dare you say that? How dare you give a date? Okay? Today, and you will see it next week, there are some member states who are throwing out now 2033. It was already mentioned here on the forum yesterday. And I said, why 2033? It's so far from now. We are here in 2022. But this is then 30 years from Thessaloniki. I certainly agree that it is important to have dates, clear benchmarks, and clear ways of saying and showing to the people in the region, look, this works. Because if it doesn't work, everybody is losing hope. And we are at crunch time now. We are really, and I fully know where you're coming from. I know the daily work you are doing in North Macedonia to try to resolve the issues with one member state. Albania, of course, rightly so, wanting to jump ahead. And then this is one angle, but then we have, of course, the dialogue Serbia-Kosovo that needs to absolutely come to a final closure. And Bosnia-Herzegovina was mentioned, you know, we worked quite intensely with the leaders. And there will be language on that next week, but it's not about the language in the Council conclusion. To me, it is today, it is about what we all collectively, the member states, the 27, but all those around with us. And again, there are many with us who don't want to be member of the European Union. Norway has rejected 3 times membership of the European Union, but Norway is member of the single market. Okay, it was their choice, by choice. Iceland too, the membership application is frozen today. We negotiated with Iceland today, they said we don't want to, we're stepping back. But this is changing also, there's a lot changing there. Here we have a very clear perspective for all 6. And I want to take this idea out of the room that, yeah, this is not going to happen. This is going to happen, and I do believe with the historical moment where we are today, it can deepen, it can accelerate. We have to work together. Countries in the region have to work merit-based, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, and ensure that the reforms are taking place, because that's in the end where member states still look at. They want to see the reforms happening. And then we can make this work. So maybe this is just my final message, we can do it.
Thank you. We have heard European political community and the enlargement process are not rival, but can be complementary. And of course, I'm thinking also here as an analogy about all regional integration plan that we have been heard in this year, and also how they have been attracting different reaction. I would like to ask Mr. Deputy Assistant Secretary and Special Envoy for the Western Balkans of the US, Gabriel Escobar. Please.
Thank you very much. You know, I am very glad to share that, you know, well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers of the conference. I want to thank North Macedonia for this tremendous initiative to bring people together, to discuss issues, and to have a common framework going forward. But the important thing, I think, that people should understand from this conference, and from this panel in particular, is that everybody is united on the way forward. That is Euro-Atlantic integration. I don't think that you'll find anybody on this panel who disagrees with it. And I don't think you'll find anyone, even within the region, who disagrees with that as a way forward. So when we talk about the challenges in the Western Balkans that are facing us right now at this historical period, there are many. But rather than focus on those, I want to focus on the opportunities that are here. And quite honestly, the opportunities are really our unity and our values. That's what's propelled the Euro-Atlantic community to be the most successful in history. And that's what's going to move us forward in helping resolve some of the differences and some of the issues that are facing the region. So from our perspective of the United States, we are strongly supportive of the European project. I have to say that in my lifetime, it has been the most dramatic, helpful, and important initiative and development in history. That is, the European enlargement to include former adversaries of the Warsaw Pact, and the simultaneous enlargement of NATO to include former foes. And what Europe has done is it has actually exported peace as far as it could, as quickly as it could. And every country that joined the European Union became more stable, more prosperous, more peaceful, and more democratic, at almost no cost to the rest. And even the idea of becoming a candidate, not even a member, has created this enormous positive pressure for reform. And that is really what this is all about, and we can't lose sight of that. And we can't lose sight of the fact that just being a candidate has created tremendous benefit for the people. But I also frequently have to remind some of my European friends, not those in the structures, but those in the public, that the Western Balkans are part of that project, that the Western Balkans are geographically, economically, culturally, and historically European, that you share those values, that you have been solid partners in NATO, and you have been great bilateral partners to the United States, and that is an opportunity as well. And more than that, the tremendous opportunities that this new generation offer for Europe from the Western Balkans in terms of energy, entrepreneurial spirit, and a desire to be part of that larger community is also an opportunity. And so the message that I want to leave you with is that even though people are focused on a particular process within a particular political framework, that there is an awful lot of progress going on other places, through commercial channels, through bilateral channels, through other multilateral channels. And in all of that, the Western Balkans is succeeding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I may, a follow-up question on this. I mean, we have heard about all these settings, but how we ensure synergy between all of them and also inclusivity?
Yeah, and I know that you're referring to the Open Balkans, so I'll address that directly. The policy of the United States is to encourage, to support any initiatives that bring you closer to Europe and that bring the region closer together. And we support the Berlin process. We support the Common Regional Market, the CEFTA, and Open Balkans as long as it is focused on European integration and as long as it remains open to all of the countries. 70% of the economy of the Western Balkans is linked to Europe, to the European market. And the rest of it, almost all of the rest of it, is linked to the region. So both of those processes have to take place within the same framework. That is a framework of rule of law, open and transparent markets, and inclusivity. So as long as the Open Balkans fulfills that, it has our support. But it's not the only initiative that we support. We support all of the initiatives of the region that bring you closer.
Many thanks. All eyes are now to the closure of the French presidency of the European Council, but the next presidency will be of Czech Republic, and a lot have been told about expectation also about a possible summit of the presidency between the EU and the Western Balkans. I would like to ask to Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Alex Chmela, to give his address and to give us a bit longer term perspective, because in these days everybody seems to be looking at the last news.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much also for choosing this particular topic for this debate. One peculiar thing about this topic is that it could be used, maybe you would tell, in the past 5 years, 15 years, 30 years, 150 years, or even, different hundreds of years. Western Balkans has been always part of a wider history, of European continent, of course, of wider region. And in this respect, when we think of today, we have to also look at it with a historical perspective. What we have done in the past 20 years in terms of making Balkans closer to the EU is on the timeline of history. Actually, it has a tremendous speed. And I understand the expectations, but we also have to understand that history is not easy and that we have to fight and go step by step in order to be able to achieve and, let's say, swim against the flow of history sometimes if it's needed. One important element I wanted to mention is the slogan and motto of the Czech presidency starting 1st of July, the presidency of the EU Council, which states Europe as a task, rethink, rebuild, repower. And the Europe as a task is actually an excerpt from the speech of Václav Havel in 1996 in front of the European Parliament, where he talks about the end of history. He talks about Francis Fukuyama with hope that it could happen, with the, I would say, victory of liberal democracy, but with doubts about the sustainability without our efforts. And this is what is happening basically today also in Western Balkans. We have to be able to face the challenges and work with them. Now, this is the general message. 2 days ago, I was together with our French colleagues and colleagues from all of the EU at a meeting at the Salon de l'Horloge in Quai d'Orsay, which is a room where Robert Schuman in 1951 had this speech on the 9th of May, had this speech on establishment basically of the European community, but more concretely on the establishment of steel and coal community. And this was in early 50s and late 40s a way and a method to unite Europe, steel and coal. This was the initiation, this was the start. Then very much gradually, in years and long years from today's perspective, it was actually quite some time, a proper economic union has been established. And the political integration, at least the nominal political integration, is actually a matter of fact only since Maastricht Treaty. Of course, politics always is linked with economics. But what I want to say that the European project per se was a gradual one, and it's still gradual. We talk now during the conference, or we have talked about the conference on the future of the EU, about possible future changes, also to be prepared for enlargement. We will be talking, most probably, after what we see, the outcome of the European Council next week, about the future institutional setting of the EU, also in the context of enlargement. And Europe will and is changing. And in this respect, to be as concrete as I can, I will maybe say 3 elements of the program that we have for Western Balkans. The first one is, of course, and very much concretely, the individual processes in the country, the reconciliation processes that we want to support different stakeholders, be it in the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, but also in somehow having a stable constitutional and otherwise political environment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are also ready to work, and I think this is important, to unlock the bottlenecks of the enlargement process. I think that at the very moment, at the very minute, very hour, it is clear what is the bottleneck, at least in the case of North Macedonia. And we are also ready, whatever happens today, tomorrow, and next week, we are ready to work on that in detail. And I would say very much concretely to have this issue unblocked, because I believe that the enlargement process is actually not blocked by the EU, but by the very much complexity and heterogeneity of the decision-making, by the veto points, and by the fact that sometimes we have very little space to define a common European interest, and individual national interests, they somehow tend to prevail, be much more visible, and create more damage than it's actually needed. But the third element, I think, is important. We have heard in the past year, maybe a little bit more, well, way more, but now it's becoming more and more concrete, about a possible, and it has been already mentioned, either gradual, phased, or staged accession. I think that the most important word in all of this is accession, that it is about acceding to the EU, but it is also getting inspired, and that is why I talked about this, getting inspired in how the EU was created, is to start from basics, start from concrete cooperation, start from economics, because it has clear spillover effects into political. Once you have economic ties and relations set up, the political alignment, the political interest tend to align themselves almost automatically. This is a basis of how history works, and this is a basis how history also should be at our help, so that we just do not swim against the flow of history, but that we can use it a little bit. So staged accession is, or gradual accession, is something that we want to work more concretely on. I dare to say that it has not left the environment of think tanks and of analytical non-papers for the time being. We hope to be able to bring it, at least to some extent, to an institutional setting. Of course, maybe not going too fast on legal aspects of it. We had very recently a reform of the methodology, of the accession methodology, so we are careful in this. But we are also, in the context of the Eastern crisis of the war in Ukraine, we are convinced that we need concrete and tangible steps. We need concrete benefits to be able to offer to the countries of Western Balkans, and pending the decision of the European Council next week, also in some aspects for Eastern Europe. So I hope, in a nutshell, that's why I was so general and historical at the beginning, that we'll be able to use history at our benefit and not to create a sentiment that accession to the EU is here and that economic cooperation and political closeness is here. It's very close, and we have to be able to go up. Go up not just in acquis and in access to sectoral policies, but go up also in decision-making, in consultation, involve Western Balkan countries more in what we do, including sanction regimes. We have to also be able to provide more support for cohesion, more support for, after the acceding to sectoral policies, that these countries remain competitive and that they will not suffer from brain drain and hand drain. So in this respect, I think we can have something concrete, even though historical aspects of different bottlenecks of enlargement process might still endure more than a couple of days, even though I still remain hopeful, touching the wood. Thank you.
More concrete support. There is one idea that, together with Dusan Relic at SVP, we have been pushing for years about gradual accession to structural funds. Is this in the agenda today?
It's a very relevant point. I mean, I think everybody knows the numbers that Western Balkan countries per capita receive today 10 times less than, let's say, comparable regional actors such as Bulgaria and Croatia. So we have had quite a big increase. As for the current multi-annual financial framework, it would be difficult, as I sometimes put it, to squeeze a mosquito into it, especially in the context of the demandiness of the Ukrainian crisis. But there are already talks as of now, in Eastern context maybe, but to reopen the multi-annual financial framework, which is a horror for everybody who knows how the negotiations work. But at the same time, we have bigger challenges ahead of us, so I would not exclude it. So the money is not there yet, not at the volume that would be commensurate, that at half of the accession you should get only half, not 10 times less. And that we need to be prepared for this, especially in the negotiations of the next MFF after 2027.
Many thanks. We have been asking a lot of support for the region, but maybe we should ask also what the country from the region can do for the EU, and which contribution, which added value they can bring to the EU through their integration into the Union. I would ask this to Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and the European Integration, Maggie Fino.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank again the government of North Macedonia for organizing this event, which is always important and has turned into an essential forum of concrete communication and cooperation for our region. But it should be said that this year, different from the previous year, it takes on a special importance due to the situation in Europe, the situation that Europe is going through, and because of the challenge and threat in our region deriving from the situation. Now, in the last panel, quite similar to this one, I spoke about the importance of the EU strategic compass and how it includes the Western Balkans, how important our work as NATO partners is, in the OSCE during our chairpersonship back in 2020. So I do not want to dwell too much on that and be repetitive for this panel. But I would like to say that it is now a universally accepted fact that the war in Ukraine has created an immense challenge for the whole world, leading to threats and security issues for us all. Issues ranging from the rising food prices to genuine security challenges, or the challenge to the European security architecture and the rule-based international order. For the Western Balkans, this challenge has an even more significant meaning, and this is what makes this forum particularly essential this year as compared to before, because it's also universally accepted that the Western Balkans region is probably the second most threatened region due to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. It is a well-known and proven fact that Russia has for years made very serious efforts to create influence, to create a kind of infrastructure of media influence, propaganda, and funding in order to create such tensions and to plant divisions in our region, which is rightly seen as the EU's inner courtyard. And for precisely this reason, our region feels especially threatened by what is happening in Ukraine. It should be noted, however, that although politicians in Europe and the Balkans are well aware of the challenges posed by Russian efforts to challenge the security architecture in Europe and the international rule-based order, at first, Europe's reaction to what was happening in Ukraine, it raised some hopes for us in the Western Balkans. It raised hopes in several directions, actually. First, because it was thought that this crisis in Ukraine would shake Europe from the kind of strategic hibernation where it had fallen for years now. Because for years it had seemingly prioritized domestic politics without having a strategic approach to enlargement. Hence why it was thought that the war in Ukraine would shake the EU and force it to take swift measures in relations to our region, to the Western Balkans too. Whilst the Western Balkans finds itself in a bit of a paradoxical situation, where, and perhaps here I should just talk about Albania, but where we have fulfilled our obligations and responsibilities and are working hard on the very necessary reforms. And we were promised that if we achieved all of the above, that we would be able to take the next step in the integration process. We deserve to take the next step. All of the stakeholders have mentioned this, and yet we're still at a standstill. But this time, for a reason that is not in our hands, and that it doesn't come from the Western Balkan countries as such, as the students of the process, but actually from the master itself, or the EU. The EU has told us for so long to leave aside bilateral issues, to learn to cooperate better together, and now the process is blocked from the EU for a Balkanic reason. It was thought that the war in Ukraine would make the EU revive its strategic approach, and we assume that this willingness and concentration of resources would translate into a similar willingness for our region's enlargement process. Unfortunately, the past few months have turned this optimism into a bit of a sense of disappointment, taking stronger nuances because we're being asked yet again by our citizens, if we've done all this work, everything that's required from us, then why are we still at a standstill despite all the effort and the hard work we've put through? It is true, though, that there's been a lot of encouraging statements, such as the one today as well, and high-level visits, which are, of course, always welcome and highly appreciated as an expression of political will to take the process forward. But we're all witnesses that this process is frozen for reasons beyond our means and capacities. We've now reached a point where the Western Balkans has more cooperation between the countries, more vision and strategic thinking than ever before, and this is also something that we can bring to the table. But this, of course, is thanks to the great investment made by the EU in the region. But at the same time, the EU integration is blocked by the EU itself for a bilateral historical issue. The danger of this situation is that if in the EU we talk about enlargement fatigue, in the Western Balkans or in Albania, which I can talk about specifically, there is an integration disappointment. A kind of disappointment of our citizens who've had this dream for so long now and who never seem to come close despite all the best efforts in making it tangible and attainable. As Albania and North Macedonia have met all the obligations and requirements, these achievements have been recognized by the EU institutions and by the member states, yet the process is still blocked despite the promises made. Now, it is important to note that the security of our region is inextricably linked to the integration process. So if the integration process is further delayed and it begins to turn into a process that loses the credibility in a dream which seems unattainable and thus loses its power, this is the worst situation in which our region can be found, especially with regards to the security of the region. Perhaps it's no coincidence that Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the European perspective has not seemed very realistic due to the problems posed by the post-war settlement, is today the most vulnerable point of the whole region. Now, I'd like to conclude by saying Russia understands quite well that uncertainty in the Western Balkans means insecurity for the EU, but it's imperative that we understand this and work closer together towards overcoming it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say that we need concrete additional progress, to quote the final declaration of the Berlin first year of the Berlin process. And I would ask new special envoy for the Western Balkans, Manuel Sarrazin. I mean, we have heard that intention from Berlin to somehow relaunch this process, and to also we have read a recent paper from the Bundestag taking position on this necessity. Maybe I would give you the floor for your address, and maybe you can spend a few words also on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I had some prepared speaking points, but so many right things have been already mentioned, so I will go totally off my speaking points and try to make some added value. And of course, added value might be to say quite clear, German government, the Chancellor has decided to reinvigorate Berlin process. He publicly on his travel last week to the region declared that he will invite for the second half of this year to a conference to Berlin. And it's making clear that this historic decision of creating Berlin process, also the main aim of creating a common regional market with the four main freedoms, this shall be reinvigorated. And I think this is an important signal. And perhaps even more important than this saying is that when the Chancellor and also the Foreign Minister are talking about the region, you feel that this is not a distant thing for them. It's part of their personal political agenda, not in the sense of that they will run through Germany and win next elections with the topic, but because that's one of the reasons why they make politics, individually, as a person. They both believe in the Western Balkans, and they both have a personal history with this region, which nobody in the region knows or knew before. So I think it's clear that you can count on Germany to that extent. Second point, which is really important, is Germany believes in the old and good-fashioned model of full enlargement, being a full member of European Union on equal eye level, with respect, with all rights and duties. Nothing else will give leverage to us in this region. I don't know anybody in this region who wants to become second-class member in a sport club, in a fighting club, in a tennis club, or in the European Union club. Nobody, never wants. So we can think about all measurements, how to make it faster, more credible, but the first point must be we have to fight for the credibility of the enlargement promise itself. Without the credible enlargement promise itself, all other models, all other debates are, from my sense, not as helpful as they could be. Second point is, some time ago when there was this Euro crisis, I was an MP in Germany handling Euro crisis, and like every week I had to make some discussions, is this the end of European Union? And then I found some book, because I studied history, and there was an old history book, and it was named The Crisis of Europe, since 1917. So I usually brought it to some meetings and thought, like, you see, quite funny, yeah? But the point is, like, what is different today? I mean, look what, you said 2013, Bojan, the last enlargement, yeah? But look what changed in the meantime in the European Union. First, we made ESM, yeah? So, sincere new possibility for European Union to bail out member states. We gave completely new setup of rights of supervision and also control to the ECB on controlling financial markets. Then this lovely thing named Corona came, and we built up Euro bonds for financing once at least the new economical setup of the Union. Yeah? And then latest, imagine one of you in this hall thinking 1 year ago we would sit here today and member states are going to commission to Angelina and saying, this is the bill for the weapons which I sent to Ukraine, please reimburse me. We would have all said, impossible, the treaties will never give that. Europe is stuck, nothing will happen. And now we even have a conference on the future of Europe, which I don't know where it will lead or not, but which is opening up the prospects on changing European Union. European Union is more lively than you think. And it's really important for this region to recognize it is, important for you to see European Union is a model for the future and is getting stronger also in the situation. We are changing in really decisive politics to a positive way to go. So I think everything what has been said is quite right, especially this main point which Angelina made, also Bojan made, actually everybody was doing to a certain extent. European accession policy was the most successful instrument of perhaps not even only foreign policy, of export of stability, prosperity and democracy in the second half of 20th century. And I still really strongly believe that we need this instrument also for being successful in this region, but also as a European Union on global level. As far as Bojan said, litmus test for credibility of enlargement is Northern Macedonia. The Western Balkans are the litmus test for the credibility of our role in a globalized competition of models on the scale. So we cannot fail with that. And this is perhaps my message. Germany is strongly believing, and you can count on the clear message, we are willing to do, we will be engaged, Chancellor, Foreign Minister, personally engaged, we will come again, we will not stop only because one defeat is happening or something is not working out. We are not looking only for fast successes. We want to go together with you in the region, the path towards common family within the European Union.
To sum up, the enlargement needs the most a clear political message that the offer is there. Some recent proposal we have seen from Vienna that seems to somehow embrace this idea of staged accession. I would ask Ambassador Johannes Aigner, Special Envoy for the Western Balkans, to share with us his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with you, among you. Well, at the last speaker, one could be tempted to say with the German humorist and author Karl Valentin, everything has been said except by myself, but still a few considerations and reflections. The Polish author Zbigniew Bauman, in a book tagged Europe as an unfinished adventure. I think this adventure with the membership applications by Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia has got a completely new and possibly far-reaching dimension, and we have just seen the opinions by the Commission. The door seems to be open, but we don't know how far, when, and what will take us to finish this adventure. But what is very clear for us is that Europe and the European unification project is not complete without all the countries of the Western Balkans. This has been a conviction, a position by successive governments, Austrian governments, irrespective of which coalition was in power, and that for good reason. Austria is linked to so many ties to that region, historic, not always easy one, everybody knows that. Economic ties in almost all countries here. Austria is among the three strongest investors. But also, and not least important, human ties. There are around 500,000 inhabitants in Austria which have their origins in that region from basically former Yugoslavia. Only 100,000 from Bosnia, which came to Austria in the course of the war of the 90s. And this position has been since ever upheld and is upheld until today. Full membership of the Western Balkan countries as the ultimate goal. Now, if we came out with proposals and suggestions for a gradual integration, it is not to dilute that determination, but to the contrary, to reinvigorate it and to make we have to admit it, rather long phase between the first step and the last step, full accession, less frustrating and more beneficial to the countries and the citizens. And I'm glad that our Czech colleague said that they are ready to concretely take some suggestions up. Basically, it's gradual integration, sectoral policy-wise, institutional-wise, and also financial-wise. I think this is an important element to look into possibilities to give access, gradual access also to structural funds, precisely by the reason mentioned by our Czech colleague. There's a huge gap in what the countries get per capita depending on whether they are member states or not yet. But in order to be able to reap the benefits of such gradual integration, the first step must be made. Countries have to get out which are not yet off the starting block, and therefore we fully support and hope to see results and a good outcome for North Macedonia and Albania to start accession negotiations. I think as we speak, debates are going on in the Bulgarian parliament, hopefully with a good outcome. Bosnia-Herzegovina must get candidate status, or at least clear steps indicated for them to get this status. And Kosovo, as an immediate step, must get visa liberalization. So the European Union has to stick to its promises and to get all the countries at the next stage towards, and repeated, the full membership in the European Union. Thank you.
Now we should have connected online Presidente Piero Fassino, Chair of the Foreign Policy Committee. Is he here with us?
Thank you for your kind invitation. But having been hit by COVID, I can only participate online. Integration into Euro-Atlantic institution was promised to Balkan states in 1995, after the Dayton Peace Agreement. And the slowing down of the reform processes that the candidate countries have to carry out. An intolerable situation, all the more intolerable for North Macedonia, which with courage and determination resolved its dispute with Greece, and now finds itself blocked by a Bulgarian veto that is frankly incomprehensible. The war in Ukraine has changed the European scenario and clearly demonstrates that the only way to bring security and stability to the entire continent is precisely to enlarge the European Union to those regions, Ukraine, the Caucasus, the Balkans, that have been hit by wars and conflicts in recent decades. That is why it is necessary that the European Council of 23 and 24 June, at which candidate status will be granted to Ukraine and Moldova, to simultaneously take the decision to accelerate the ongoing negotiation with Montenegro and Serbia, to convene the intergovernmental conferences with Albania and North Macedonia, convincing Bulgaria to lift its veto, while opening up prospects for European membership to Bosnia and Kosovo. On the other hand, the NATO has long since opened its doors to Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, which makes European slackiness increasingly less justified. President Macron has put forward a proposal to set up a European political community to immediately associate the candidate countries with the Union strategic decision and make them feel part of the European family. It is a useful proposal, provided it is not an alternative to the full integration of the candidates into the European Union. The Western Balkans want to be full members of the European Union. If this were not to happen, their frustration would increase, leading them to permanently reorient themselves towards other actors. The Italian government is moving in this clear direction, as repeatedly reiterated by Prime Minister Draghi and Foreign Minister Di Maio. In the Parliament, all our political forces support this approach with conviction. And I am pleased to recall here the permanent ongoing cooperation established with all the Balkan Parliament by the Chamber of Deputies Foreign Affairs Committee that I chair. In short, time is up. Russia's aggression against Ukraine tells us that a stronger, more integrated and cohesive European Union is the condition needed to ensure stability, security and prosperity to our continent and its people. And for this reason, completing the European integration of the Western Balkans is urgent and does not tolerate ambiguity and reticence. This is the powerful message that must be sent out from this meeting to all the leaders of the Union member countries. I repeat, time is up. We need to decide that the Balkan countries will be member of our family and full member of the European Union. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Fassino. Thank you for your very clear message. Now, as a perfect conclusion of our panel, we have a message from the French Secretary of State for European Affairs, Clément Beaune, and we are all looking forward to the Council organized under the French Presidency of the European Council.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers participants au Forum de Prespa, chers amis des Balkans occidentaux, au nom du gouvernement français, je suis très heureux de pouvoir m'adresser à vous, même par vidéo interposée, pour cette réunion si importante dans ce moment si important. Nous sommes bousculés par une guerre de retour sur notre continent. Vous connaissez dans les Balkans occidentaux le prix des conflits, l'importance aussi d'un engagement européen plus fort collectivement pour y faire face. La présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne qui s'achève dans quelques jours a fait de l'intégration des Balkans occidentaux une priorité. Nous avions besoin, je crois, pour la France de démontrer encore davantage cet engagement. Le président de la République française, Emmanuel Macron, le gouvernement français, se sont particulièrement impliqués dans la région pour essayer de trouver d'abord ou de faciliter une solution aux différends qui persistent entre Sofia et Skopje, pour permettre de débloquer le plus rapidement possible l'ouverture des négociations d'adhésion concrètement, tant pour la Macédoine du Nord que pour l'Albanie. Nous avons besoin de ce signal, nous y sommes engagés, nous le serons encore chaque heure qui passe dans les jours et les semaines qui viennent. Nous avons besoin de montrer que la perspective européenne des Balkans occidentaux est un engagement concret qui progresse. La guerre en Ukraine a renforcé encore cette priorité, car l'Ukraine, comme d'autres pays, souhaite aujourd'hui s'inscrire dans cette perspective européenne. Mais nous devons montrer justement que pour beaucoup de pays qui, depuis plusieurs années, se sont engagés dans ce processus ou aspirent à l'être dans les Balkans occidentaux, nous accélérons, nous faisons davantage. C'est le sens que nous avons donné à une réunion qui se tiendra avant le dernier Conseil européen du calendrier de la présidence française, le 23 juin, pour réunir les pays de l'Union européenne, les pays des Balkans occidentaux, et faire avancer des coopérations concrètes, des projets tangibles en matière de sécurité, d'énergie, de jeunesse. Nous avons besoin de ces signaux, nous avons besoin de ces avancées, nous avons besoin de ces engagements. Je veux aussi remercier tous les pays des Balkans occidentaux qui, face à la guerre en Ukraine, se sont engagés, là aussi de manière très concrète, courageuse, à adopter un certain nombre de sanctions conformément à celles que l'Union européenne a décidées. Cette coopération, cet alignement entre nous est nécessaire pour démontrer un engagement européen qui avance. Je sais aussi que pour plusieurs pays, je pense à l'Albanie, au Monténégro, à la Macédoine du Nord, l'intégration à l'Alliance Atlantique est une protection démontrée dans ce conflit. Nous devons donc repenser notre architecture commune de sécurité, accélérer le processus d'adhésion à l'Union européenne pour les pays qui y sont engagés ou qui sont proches de l'être. Je rappelle encore une fois nos efforts et notre engagement à cet égard. Coopération concrète, perspective européenne concrète, négociations qui avancent. Telle est l'architecture, l'image de l'Europe que nous devons construire ensemble, par ces projets, par ces avancées, par ces engagements. Je vous remercie encore de l'organisation de ce forum. Je suis vos travaux avec intérêt et je serai toujours à vos côtés dans les semaines comme dans les mois qui viennent. Merci.
I think this was the perfect conclusion for our panel. Please join me to thank our speakers.